What's going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you my top 10 favorite horror films of 2024. So of course, I have not seen every single horror movie that came out in 2024. So there's a couple of movies that maybe you would have put higher on your list that I didn't even get a chance to see. One in particular is Nosferatu that literally just came out. I did not get a chance to see it. I probably won't have a chance to see it for a while. So unfortunately, if it was going to end up my list, it's just not going to be in this list right now. But I did see quite a lot of horror films this year. And honestly, it was a really good year for horror. There was a lot of amazing films that came out, and so let's just talk about them. First things first, with the honorable mentions, I have one honorable mention I want to go over, and that is Abigail. So Abigail was a movie I was really looking forward to because it was the same directors as the recent Scream films as well as Ready or Not, so I thought it was going to end up being a solid movie, and it was. It was a really fun film, just absolute insanity with this little girl being a vampire and just completely taking out this house full of people that were there for criminal reasons. And really interesting storyline. I just really enjoy how it played out, and it was really fun. If you like fun horror movies, basically a horror comedy, then this movie was definitely for you. Very campy, very insane. It just didn't crack my top 10. In my number 10 spot is going to be M. Night Shyamalan's new film, Trap. So Trap is the only movie on this list that I feel like you could probably consider it not actually a horror film, and I wouldn't argue with you whatsoever, but for me, I felt like it has enough horror qualities for me to consider it a horror film. But like I said, I completely understand if someone doesn't consider it one. I feel like it deserves to be called one just because there are very, horrifying moments. You're just seeing it from the perspective of the killer. Therefore, it's gonna not feel as horrifying as it would be if it wasn't from the perspective of the killer. But I really like M. Night's directing. He does a lot of like close-up dialogue shots, very intimate with the characters, and there's really interesting dialogue. A lot of people don't like his dialogue, but I think a lot of it is actually purposeful, and it has almost its own like style to it, and actually I think it works just fine. The movie itself looks gorgeous. It takes place at this concert for the entire film where this police force has essentially set up a trap for Josh Hartnett's character, who is a killer, and they're trying to capture the killer. They just don't know what the killer looks like, so they know that he's there, so they're trying to figure that out, and he's essentially thinking to himself like, how the hell am I going to get out of here without being caught? And so the whole movie he's just looking for like exit paths and just how to get his daughter out of there as quietly as possible without alerting her or alerting the police. And I think it ends up making for a very fun movie with a lot of surprisingly hilarious moments and a lot of intense moments. Like, even though he is a killer, you still almost kind of like want to root for him because he's the perspective, he's the protagonist character, he's the one you're following, so you're like, ooh, how's he gonna get out of this, how's he gonna do this? And at a certain point, you're not really rooting for him, like I said, but you still like feel attached to his journey in some sense, which I think is really interesting. Josh Hartnett's acting is also incredible here. I haven't seen him in that many projects, but he is really good in this movie. M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, Salika Shyamalan, is the like main singer in this film, and she actually has a lot of good songs. Like, I think part of the reason they made this movie was to kind of promote her music and just show appreciation to his daughter's music, and I see nothing wrong with that because she's got good songs, and it made for a better movie because there's a lot of good songs in it that kind of added to the film. I think my only issue with this is that there were some moments that were a bit harder to believe. Like, you had to kind of, you had to suspend your disbelief a little bit because it was just like, okay, I don't think that would happen in that situation. Like, I feel like that would go down differently, and if you get too tied up in all that, you kind of lose the magic of movies. So I usually don't like to get too tied up in, believability and realism, but some moments like that just kind of were hard to not think about. But really enjoyed this. Honestly, I think it's quite underrated. A lot of people seem to not like it, so personally, I enjoyed it. In number 9 spot, I've got A Quiet Place Day One. So this is definitely the weakest A Quiet Place film. I think the first two were much better, but this prequel A Quiet Place film was actually really solid. Well, I guess prequel in a sense. It's a prequel because it takes place at the beginning of the apocalypse when it first started, but it has nothing to do with the other characters. It doesn't have anything to do with the characters we see in the main Quiet Place films. But I thought it was pretty beautiful, and the fact that it's not even about like the actual apocalypse itself, I thought was really interesting. And instead you have these two characters, Samira and Eric, played by Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn, who both did incredible in this movie. And the whole movie is literally just them trying to get across New York City in order to get a slice of pizza, because Samira has cancer and believes she's gonna die soon anyways, and they're probably gonna end up dying because of what's going on with these monsters. So she just wants a slice of pizza. That's what she came to New York City for. She wanted a slice of pizza, and that was their goal. And I think it's such a simple concept to just make a whole movie out of, but it ends up being really beautiful. And I really enjoyed it. I was a little disappointed when I first watched the movie because I did kind of want to learn more about the monsters. So I did leave the movie just a little disappointed there. But at the end of the day, it's just not the purpose of the film. It wasn't trying to be, a whole movie about the origins of these monsters. It was literally just, let's just tell another story in this universe and just have these characters trying to get a slice of pizza. Like, it's such a simple movie, but I really loved it. I think it was actually really cool, and I would be completely fine with seeing more movies like this. In number 8 spot, I've got The Substance. I just recently watched this and it was kind of insane. Like, it was such a crazy movie with such an insane storyline where you have this character who is getting a bit older and she's kind of losing relevancy when it comes to popularity because she's a celebrity, and people are kind of treating her quite poorly because of her aging a bit. Even her own boss was kind of like, oh, we kind of want to get rid of her, we want some younger people in here. And so she feels the need to go to this company that essentially is able to duplicate her as like a younger version that's more I guess conventionally attractive and again, younger. So she wants to kind of relive how she felt when she was younger in a sense, and it kind of just, this whole crazy storyline goes from there, where doing this slowly results in her like original self becoming more and more like torn apart, and it just gets like, wow, like crazy towards the end of the movie especially. And I think it was quite good. Obviously, it was touching on the subject of beauty standards and what that can do to people, how it can make people just absolutely lose it. And I thought it was so interesting, such an interesting concept. I just felt like the only thing that held this movie back, it was a little bit too in your face with it. Like, there was so much just knock into your head with the theming and the messaging of the movie, and I don't really like when movies do that too much. I think it kind of takes away from the messaging, unless it's like done in a certain way. But I just don't know if the way this movie did it was necessarily like what I like, so it did kind of hold the movie back a little bit. I think I would have appreciated just a little bit more subtlety, but I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was, again, absolutely insane. It was a really well shot movie. It looked amazing. One of the best looking movies of the year, to be honest. Definitely one of the best looking horror movies. The colors were amazing. I mean, the movie has this like 80s aesthetic to it, even though I think it takes place in present day, but it has this like 80s aesthetic to it with the colors and everything like that and the clothing. So all that was really awesome. Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley are incredible in this. Definitely some of the best horror performances of the year from the both of them. The editing was amazing in this movie too. Like, there's so many like jump cuts that they do to like different moments that parallel other moments in the movie in such an interesting way. The soundtrack was unbelievably incredible. So there's a lot to love about this film, and I absolutely loved it for that. I just think the one thing holding it back was the lack of subtlety, and some people don't care about that, but for me, it's just kind of like, I'm like, all right, you can dial it down a little bit, I think. In number 7 spot, Terrifier 3. So this is interesting because I remember in 2022, Terrifier 2 was like one of my best horror movies of that year, but I actually think both of those films are very close in quality. So I think that just means that 2023 has a lot more horror films that I like even more than 2022. That just goes to show how incredible this year is for horror. But Terrifier 3, I really loved. Easily the goriest film I've ever seen, the most boundary pushing movie I've ever seen. I mean, especially the shower scene, what they do to the kids in the beginning and the kids in other parts of the movie. Oh my goodness, man, it was just fucking brutal, but it worked. Like, they did it in a way that worked without it being too much, without it being like, okay, this is just ridiculous. No, it was boundary pushing in the sense that just made you feel disgusted, grossed out, just terrified, but in ways that actually work and don't make me just not want to watch the movie. It's not like the Human Centipede where I'm just like, oh, this is disgusting, I don't want to watch it. Instead, it was, this is disgusting, but I kind of want to watch it. Like, it's a very different type of disgust, but it works. It really does. And this movie goes pretty far with that. The characters were quite decent. I mean, Sienna, obviously, we already had her from Terrifier 2, and she was just carried over into this one. And I think she does a great job in this, maybe even a better job than she did in the first one or in the second one. We also had Gabby as well, who was her cousin. And yeah, she has some good moments too. Victoria, like, was not expecting this character to be such a big part of the Terrifier franchise, but she was. And obviously Art the Clown, he's the main show. He's the main thing you're coming there for. And he's easily the funniest in this movie and also the most terrifying at the same time, which I think that is such an insane accomplishment, that he's able to be the scariest and the funniest in just this one movie all at the same time. Insane. I don't know how he does it, but it does it very well. The movie does a great job of balancing the supernatural elements from the second film and the gritty elements of the first film and kind of mushing them together in this third film to the point where there are some supernatural things, but it's not nearly as much as Terrifier 2. And then that gritty tone that comes back is just like the hardest it's ever been. Like there are some really fucked up moments that just make you feel like, again, so terrified and disgusted at the same time. Literally my only like major criticism with this film was that the soundtrack wasn't as good as Terrifier 2. Terrifier 2 had one of my favorite horror soundtracks of all time with all the 80s synth music. It was so fucking good. But this one, unfortunately, kind of holds back on that. There isn't as much of it. And the music that is there is usually just like a couple Christmas songs that just don't really fit the vibe of Terrifier that much. Even though it's a Christmas themed movie, I don't know. I prefer to have some 80s music in there like they did for Terrifier 2. I thought that was a lot better. It's okay though. It's not the end of the world. This film is amazing. I really loved it, but it's not my favorite of the year. In number 6 spot, The First Omen. So I went into this not really knowing what to expect. I've seen the original Omen, but I did not see any of the other ones. So all I knew is that this was going to be a prequel to that, and it ended up being one of the best horror prequels of all time, one of the best prequels in general. It is such a good prequel because it actually does a good job of showing what led up to the original Omen film, and it gives us a lot more information that was actually interesting and meaningful to that film. It actually ends up making the Omen a better movie itself. So the overall just concept of this is that there's this group of Catholics at the church. They're trying to essentially birth the Antichrist, and doing so they believe that it's going to raise more evil and therefore make people turn to God and the church and everything like that. And very, very interesting how that all plays out. But it's a very well-made movie with a lot of just insane moments, a lot of terrifying moments too. And I really, really love especially the final act. The final like 30 minutes is just batshit craziness, but it was pretty cool. So I wasn't really sure how much I was going to like this one, but I ended up really, really loving it. It just took some time to really get into it. I think the early bits of the movie were a little slower, but once you got into it, it was just quite an experience. So definitely appreciated this movie quite a bit. I don't really think it's a movie I'm going to rewatch that, often in life, but I do think it did a lot of cool things for The Omen, and it's definitely my favorite of the 2 Omen movies that I watched. In number 5 spot, Smile 2. So I don't think I like this more than the first Smile, but it was still really, really solid. I love the concept of Smile. It's not the most original idea ever. Obviously, there's movies that are like this already, but I think Smile handles the concept better than most other movies. Like the fact that it's this thing that passes on from one person to the next, and the way that it passes on is if you witness them doing, what to themselves. And it makes for a lot of genuinely terrifying moments because there's really not much you can do about it. You are like completely out of control of yourself. And I think that's where most of the scares come from, because this thing in particular, you just really can't escape it. I mean, even when it comes to the main character here, Skye Riley, played by Naomi Scott, she witnesses it, obviously, and then she's just completely out of control for the rest of the movie. Like, she'll see things that aren't there, she'll like just completely lose her mind in all sorts of moments, and all leads up to the incredible finale of this movie. And it's really a gory movie. Like, it does not hold back. They show you everything, which I think is good for horror movies. They should show everything. Well, it depends on the movie, of course. Sometimes I think showing a little less is fine, but it depends on the movie. This type of movie, I think it's better to show it, and they really do. They don't hold back whatsoever. Honestly, Parker Finn's directing is really solid. He's becoming one of my favorite horror directors just from the first 2 Smile films because of how well made they are. Especially that opening scene, the whole one-shot sequence, one of my favorite scenes of this entire year. Such a good scene. I will say the ending did slightly leave a sour taste in my mouth, the way they end this film, the fact that, well, I won't go into spoilers, but there are certain parts of the movie that weren't exactly true, and to me that just kind of took away the impact of some of the moments in the movie, even though I understand the purpose of it, and that was okay. But it's just like, okay, when you go through a movie and it kind of feels like it's a lie to you in the end, a little too much. Does it take away the impact for some of the scenes? Yeah, just a little, but I still think it was quite good and definitely one of the best horror movies of the year. In number 4 spot, Longlegs. So Longlegs was a very hyped up horror movie because they were saying it's going to be the scariest movie of all time, the next Silence of the Lambs. Like, it was really being hyped up, and I don't think it quite reaches those levels. I do think this movie was slightly disappointing, but that's not necessarily saying that there's anything wrong with the movie in a significant sense. I just think the marketing was pushing this movie to be much bigger than it actually ended up being, which is, again, fine. I'm not one to say a movie's bad just because the marketing made it seem like it was going to be even better than it was. It just led to it being a little disappointing. It was still incredible, though. Nicolas Cage, incredible in this movie. He was absolutely terrifying, borderline funny in a few scenes, but mostly terrifying. The very just eerie and creepy atmosphere of this film, I really appreciated. It feels like a film that came from the 90s. Like, it really does. It doesn't feel like a modern movie in a way that really works. I think just overall, Osgood Perkins, he does a good job at that. He does a good job of keeping that eerie tone all the way through. Maika Monroe, she's becoming one of my favorite horror actresses. Obviously, she was in It Follows, and she was great in that. She's great in this as well. I really like the mystery here. I will say some people probably will call it predictable. I really didn't predict most of it. I think most of it was stuff that I didn't see coming, and I appreciated that. But definitely an interesting mystery nonetheless. And overall, the theme of your childhood innocence and the importance of that is pretty much the whole like centerpiece of the movie. I just don't think there's anything that's gonna quite beat that eerie tone that the movie just has throughout the entire time. Like, that is what made this movie, you know, quote unquote scary, even if it didn't really have as much scares as most movies out there. It's just the eerie tone of it that just kind of made you feel uneasy. That's what worked really well for me. In number 3 spot is going to be Mads, or Mad S. Don't really know how to pronounce this title because it's spelt just Mad and then there's an uppercase S. So I don't know, probably Mads, but it's just interesting the S was capitalized. Regardless, this is a really solid film. This is a French horror film that it almost plays out like a zombie outbreak, but it's not really zombies. They kind of look like zombies. I don't know. I'm just going to call them zombies because I think it's the easier way to call them. But it's essentially this virus outbreak that makes people just go insane and start attacking and trying to kill other people, right? And the reason this movie works so well is because it's a one-shot film where the entire time it is just one shot and the camera is just moving along with the characters all throughout. And I really like movies like that. It's obviously, you know, people might call it a gimmick in some senses, but I think if they're able to implement that gimmick in a way that it actually improves the quality of the movie, makes it more interesting, then I'm all for it. And I think in this case, the one-shot aspect actually works really well because it makes the movie so much more terrifying, because it genuinely feels like you're there. It does not feel like a movie at certain points. Like, it genuinely feels like you're just watching somebody go along, and it doesn't feel like a found footage movie where the camera's all shaky and stuff like that. No, it genuinely feels like you are there, right? You're just following the characters. You're right behind them. And the movie is very terrifying, genuinely one of the scariest movies of the year. So the fact that it was a one shot all the way through, you are going with them throughout this entire outbreak, and you are seeing every part of it go on throughout the 2 hours of the movie. So that ended up making it, like I said, one of the best movies of this year, one of the best horror films especially, and I definitely recommend checking it out because it was batshit insane. The sound design was really great. There were some insane performances, but I really appreciated it. It's one that I think is more underrated. I think a lot of people probably haven't even heard of it. Definitely recommend going to check it out. In number 2 spot is going to be Speak No Evil, which I literally just got done watching a few hours ago. And I'm very glad I did because it ended up being one of my favorite horror films of the year. So I do know this is a remake. It's an American remake of a film that came out a few years ago, and I'd never seen that original one. And I do think that me not having seen that probably contributed to me liking this movie even more, because there are some big, you know, mysteries and twists and reveals that if I knew what it was going into it, maybe I wouldn't have enjoyed the movie as much. I do think it kind of relies on not knowing the different twists and such. So did that contribute to it? Like I said, probably. But regardless, this is still incredible. It has probably one of the best performances from James McAvoy I've ever seen. He is absolutely incredible in it. Like, he's almost as good as he is in Split. He's just absolutely insane in this, just going all out throughout the whole runtime. It's a very uncomfortable movie, which is awesome. It like gradually gets more and more terrifying as you're going along, because you don't really know what's going on with this family. You don't know if they're just really weird and there's going to be something else that's going to happen that's going to be the horror of the movie. But no, you realize as you're going through, it's like, okay, this family's just really fucking freaking me out. And there are things that just happen later on that just start getting borderline terrifying. And there were some moments where I was a little worried they were going to get into the, you know, the whole characters making stupid decisions problem that some movies have. But honestly, that didn't end up really happening, because pretty much anything that was going on, there was a reasonable excuse for why they weren't able to do something. For example, there were some moments where I was like, oh, maybe they should call the police, but they couldn't. They physically couldn't. They were in an area where there was no service. And some movies just kind of forget to do that, and it kind of just leaves you with this lingering annoyance in your mind of, okay, they could have solved this pretty easily. But no, there really isn't that in this movie. You genuinely don't know how they're going to get out of this, and that makes the movie all the more intense, and I really appreciated that. I'm sure I will watch the original someday, and who knows, maybe it's better than this one. I have no idea, but regardless, I really loved Speak No Evil. I really thought it was such an interesting movie and ended up being one of my favorite horror films of the year. And in the number one spot is Alien Romulus. That is not only my favorite horror movie of the year, but it's also my favorite movie of 2024. I already did my whole ranking of the year, and this was the number one. And yeah, I think this is genuinely such a phenomenal film. My only big issue is the fact that they brought back Ian Holmes' character Ash. Well, I guess it wasn't really his character, but they brought him back, at least his face, using CGI. And I just think that was just kind of not something they should have done. There was a couple callbacks to the original that I thought was just kind of like, hey, what's the point of those callbacks, you know? But everything else was incredible. It is such a beautiful looking film. It's really well shot. Fede Alvarez is really an incredible horror director and genuinely becoming one of my favorites with the, you know, modern horror films. The whole cast was incredible. Probably one of the best Alien cast. No, Aliens is definitely the best Alien cast, but this one's up there, at least top 2 or 3 for sure. These xenomorphs look incredible, all practical. There might be some CGI in there, but most of it's practical, and they look amazing. There's a lot of good tension in this movie, just all around. It is just a really well-made Alien film, and I feel like I like most of the Alien movies. I haven't really disliked that many of them, but I think Alien Romulus genuinely is my favorite Alien film. Really, I think it just did everything in the best way possible, and I really hope to see some of these characters return, at least the ones that survived, in a future film. I do hear some rumors that they might do a sequel to this, which I think would be kind of cool. But yeah, that is my top 10 horror films of 2024. Let me know your guys' list in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Peace out, everyone.